I was saying to a couple of people beforehand that my father graduated from University of Notre Dame in 1947, and the principles and ideals that for which this university stands have guided his entire life, and his love for Notre Dame has inspired many people, starting with his own family. And if it's okay, I'd like to dedicate this talk to my father. Now, I'm going to give a talk on Hangul, and a little later in the afternoon, a half talk on Jejuo, the language of Jeju Island that has recently been being documented. But let's start with Hangul, because you know that October 9th, next Sunday, is Hangul Day. And believe it or not, that is the only national holiday in the world that is devoted to the celebration of a linguistic achievement. And of course, that achievement is the creation of the much acclaimed and also much misunderstood Korean alphabet. And my hope here is that I can prepare the Notre Dame community to celebrate Hangul Day by explaining to them exactly what it is about Hangul that makes it such an extraordinary achievement, not just in the context of Korean culture, but indeed in the context of human literacy and civilization. I'll start with some historical background. This is the man you came to hear about. Our story begins with King Sejong the Great. He was the fourth king of the Joseon dynasty, and he ruled Korea from 1418 to 1450. And he's known for his enlightened rule. It was marked by social and scientific advances of various sorts, which in the day must have been entirely unprecedented, perhaps not just in Asia, but throughout the world. Maternity leave for civil servants, education for women, progressive taxation. He contributed to the development of a new musical notation, movable metal type for printing, and the list goes on. But of course, the achievement for which he is best known and most remembered is the invention of the Korean writing system, which was created 1443 or 1444, but was promulgated in 1446, as Lionel says, 570 years ago. The document in which the system was promulgated is called the Hunmin Jeongeum, the correct sounds for the instruction of the people. And it was written in Chinese. It had to be, because before the Hunmin Jeongeum, there was no way to write in Korean using a Korean orthography. And in the preface to the Hunmin Jeongeum, King Sejong said something that was extremely insightful, even by today's standards. He noted that many people fail to express their thoughts freely because Chinese characters are of no use in describing our words, since our language is different from Chinese. This is what the Hunmin Jeongeum looked like in its original form back in 1446. There were 17 consonants, 3 of which are no longer in use, and there were 11 vowels, of which 1 is no longer used. Now, the first thing to understand about Hangul is that it is an alphabetic orthography, and what that means is that the symbols correspond to individual consonants and vowels. So in that example that you see there on the board, I can walk over with this microphone. This symbol here represents a consonant sound, and this symbol here represents a vowel sound. But you see at the same time that the symbols can get grouped together into syllable-sized blocks. And that leads some people to believe that Hangul is somehow a syllabary, but it's not. It's an alphabet because each symbol corresponds to an individual consonant or vowel. A syllabary, on the other hand, would look like this. This is the Japanese hiragana. And in hiragana, each symbol corresponds to an entire syllable. So this symbol here, which cannot be broken down into subparts, represents the syllable hi, and this symbol here represents the syllable to. That's what a syllabary looks like, and Korean is not a syllabary. It's a genuine alphabet. And of course, that means it's also not a logographic system of writing, as you find in Chinese, where the characters represent something It's typically roughly a word or maybe a morpheme if you're familiar with that technical term. Now, Hangul was not originally known by that name. In the early centuries, it was simply referred to as Hunmin Jeongeum, or sometimes as Jeongeum, correct sounds, or even, somewhat derogatorily, as Onmun. The vernacular characters or even vulgar script would be a way to translate that. The name Hangul was proposed in 1912 by Zhu Sejong, who many of us think of as one of the fathers of modern Korean linguistics. Now, going back to the 14th century, to the 15th century, to the 1400s, you may be surprised to hear that the early reaction to King Sejong's invention was very negative. There was a man named Che Ma-li, who was referred to as an associate professor in the King's Academy. He was also the deputy minister of education at the time. And he wrote very publicly that the Hunmin Jeongeum will undermine our civilization. Yet here we are celebrating the Hunmin Jeongeum as a major contribution to Korean civilization. But the initial reaction was that it would undermine the civilization. Che went on to suggest that most educated people look down on the Hunmin Jeongeum and avoid using it. And finally, for scholars, it is no more than a literary amusement. If any of you had doubts about whether King Sejong was really an enlightened monarch, this would be the evidence. Che Ma-li did not end up losing his head, nor did he end up going to jail. The king was actually very happy to have criticism, even of his own ideas, and took it all very much in stride. Well, yes, you might be wondering how I got a photograph of someone from the 15th century. Patrick Deegan got it for me. No, this is actually the picture of Kwon Tae-won, who is a Korean actor who played Che Ma-li in a TV drama called The Deep-Rooted Tree, which purported to be about the creation and promulgation of Hangul. In fact, it entirely, totally inaccurate historically, but not without some dramatic and entertainment value. So a little over 50 years after King Sejong's death, one of his successors, King Yongsan-gun, had a problem. People were using Hangul to criticize him, but he had a solution. And his solution was to issue a proclamation. From this time on, that's in 1504, no persons shall teach the Hunmin Jeongeum to others or shall learn it. And those who have already learned it shall not use it. So much for the criticism, right? No longer possible for people to communicate that criticism in Hangul. Now, from that time forward, educated people continued to use Chinese characters to write Korean in various clumsy ways, but most Koreans, as a result, ended up remaining illiterate for the next several centuries because they did not have easy access to the king's writing system. So I went backwards there. In 1933, the Korean Language Society issued a proposition for the unification of Hangul, or orthography, and it restored and regularized the system that King Sejong had created. And at the end of Japanese rule in 1945, the newly revised Hangul was ready for use throughout the country, and that point really marked the final triumph of the king's orthography. What I'd like to do now, and this is sort of the heart and soul of my talk, is explain to you what makes Hangul special, what the fuss is all about, and why it really does deserve not only recognition by UNESCO, which it has received, but also a national holiday. And I want to focus on two features of Hangul that are generally not understood or even mentioned. The first is the letter shapes, and the second is the special principle for spelling that Hangul follows. Let me begin by talking about the letter shapes. The letter shapes, at least some of them, were designed to depict the position of the lips and the tongue during the pronunciation of the particular sound that the letter usually represents. And of course, this showed evidence of extraordinary phonetic insights for that period, for the 15th century. Let me give you an example. Let's take the so-called lip sounds. These are the sounds that are formed by closing your lips. The M sound and the 3 P sounds in Korean are all formed that way. If you haven't received training in phonetics, you might want to think of let's just take a word like bumo, parent, bumonim, bumo. If you pronounce that word, you'll notice that for the P sound at the beginning, your lips come together, pu, pu. And for the second syllable, the M sound, mo, mo, lips come together as well. Watch yourself saying that word in the mirror, and you'll see your lips close firmly for the P sound and for the M sound. Okay? Now, King Sejong's idea was to represent the closed mouth using this square box. Okay? And what he then did, he took the M sound, the M sound to be the basic, the starting point. And then for the other lip sounds, you can see that he incorporated the box into the corresponding symbol, but either added or lengthened certain strokes to make them different from each other. But at the same time, you can see that each of them contains the box that depicts the closed mouth. There are also what I'll call at least, a tip of the tongue sounds. These are sounds that are produced using the tip of the tongue and making it touch against some part of the palate or the teeth. And a good example of that is the N sound. So if you say to yourself a syllable like na, feel free to try that, na. Do you feel the tip of your tongue pressing behind your front teeth? Yeah. So the king chose to represent that using this symbol here, this little right angle, which he thought of as depicting the tip of the tongue making contact with the back of the front teeth. And that was for him the basic tip of the tongue sound. Now, of course, the language has other tip of the tongue sounds, like the 3 T sounds. If you say a word like ta, 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 you'll feel the tip of the tongue against the back of the front teeth. And the same with the la sound, the L or R sound, la, la. And what he did there was the same thing as he did with the lip sounds. He basically took this symbol here and he took the right angle and he incorporated it into these other sounds by adding strokes. So you can see that that right angle that we saw for the N is also heard. See the right angle that he used for the N, because it's a tip of the tongue sound, that right angle shows up in these other 4 sounds as well. This is not an accident. It's totally intended and literally explicitly explained in the Hunmin Jeongeum that's why those symbols have the particular shapes that they have. They're all tip of the tongue sounds. Well, they're also back of the tongue sounds. These are the K sounds. Korean has 3 K-type sounds, as you know, and they're all produced by raising the tongues until the back of the tongue presses against the soft palate. Now, it's not easy to feel that when you say a word or sound, a syllable like ka. You may not feel that, but tonight before supper, take a spoon and just put it on your tongue, put it on the front part of your tongue, that'll suffice, and say ka, and you'll feel your tongue shoot up and press against the soft palate to give you that sound. And what the king did there was he used a different right angle, the other half of the box, so to speak. Right, tip of the tongue was this, and then back of the tongue is this, to represent sounds that are produced with the back of the tongue. So those are your 3 K sounds, and that's why they have the particular shapes they do. Additional strokes or symbol repeated to indicate, to help us distinguish among them. Okay, now it's your turn. Why did the king use that symbol there to represent an S sound? That, of course, is called shiot. It's the name of the letter. But why did he use that to represent an S sound? Anyone guess? You're close, you're close. This is the position that the tongue adopts for a certain type of S sound. Notice that the tip of the tongue is lower here, and what is it close to? Lower front teeth. That's the shiot. That's what he was doing. The shiot represents the lower front tooth. In fact, if you look at it from the side, this picture was not drawn by anyone who knew anything about Korean orthography. The person who drew this picture was simply trying to show how the S sound is produced. But you can see then drawing the picture, he depicted the lower tooth from the side in a way that looks quite a bit like the shield, and that's what the king was doing. No other alphabet in the world does that, and it's really quite remarkable and quite striking. And by the way, very few Koreans know that. I don't know if there are any Koreans in the room who want to confess that they don't know that, or say that they did learn it anywhere. Even in school, it's not taught. But now, let me talk about a special principle that guides writing Hangul. You know, many people, including people involved in the English spelling reform movement, think that an ideal orthography is one in which you have one letter for each sound and one sound for each letter. How many people have said, oh, English spelling would be so much easier if only we had one letter for each sound and one sound for each letter? A lot of people think that's the ideal. That's what linguists call a shallow orthography. We call it shallow because it provides really easy access to the word's pronunciation. You see the letter, you know exactly what the corresponding sound is, and you can read it right away, even if you don't speak the language. A lot of people think that Hangul works that way. There's a magazine article, they show up almost every year around this time for some reason. A magazine article reports that Hangul is highly efficient because each letter represents only one sound. And the Korean government itself issued a publication in which they claimed that the fundamental principle of Hangul is to spell letters in the way words are pronounced and to read letters the way they're spelled. Now, it's true, some words in Korean do have very transparent spellings, like the words I just put on the board. I, ki, kil, o, so, son. In those words, each letter does represent a single sound, and each sound is represented by a single letter. If you just look at words like that, you think it's a shallow orthography. Easy to access the pronunciation. Each sound has a single corresponding letter. Each letter has a single corresponding sound. Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, excuse me. That's true. No one would have noticed. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, right. Yeah. Pig is tue, right? Tueji. Now, unfortunately, though, a Korean really doesn't work that way. And you can see that by looking at even simple words. So take the chiut. Now, chiut is this letter here, chiut. And in a word like, this is the word for flower, followed by the subject marker. In this word, gochi, the chiut is in fact pronounced ch. But look at this word here. This is the word flower stripped of the subject marker. Here, this is not pronounced coach. It's pronounced coat, a T sound, right, corresponding to the chiut. And over here, this is the word for the leaf of a flower, and this is pronounced gonip. Here, the chiut, the ch letter, represents an N sound. So you can see that the same symbol can in fact represent different sounds. This is not a one-to-one relationship between letter and sound at all. Moreover, it doesn't work in the opposite direction either. If you look at these particular words, they all end in different symbols, but the sound at the end is the same in each case. So this word ends in the symbol tigut, and sure enough, the sound is T, quote. This word, though, ends in shiot, and the sound here is also T. It's pronounced quote, not kos, quote. And over here, this word ends in chiut, but the sound is a T sound. This is pronounced pit, pit. And here, this is a chiut at the end, but the sound is actually again a T. It's pit, pit. So there are 4 different letters at the ends of those words, but only one sound. So different letters can represent the same sound. You can't read letters and get the pronunciation just like that. And that might appear to be discouraging, but I assure you there's going to be a very happy ending. And the happy ending comes from understanding exactly what it is that Hangul tries to do, what guides it. And the key principle is that each root and each suffix has a single consistent spelling regardless of how it's pronounced. That's the principle. Each root and each suffix has a single consistent spelling. Now, just in case you're a bit rusty on roots and suffixes, let me refresh your memories a bit. Take the example I have up there on the screen. So this word here, check, that's a good example of a root. It has a nice concrete meaning. It means book. And then you can add to the root different sorts of suffixes to sort of modify it. So this is the plural suffix, check, that would be books. And I could also add a case marker, like the subject marker, check duri. So check would be the root with the concrete meaning, book, and these would be the suffixes. And same things for verbs. Ka is a nice example of a verb root, means go. And then I can modulate it by adding a sentence ender, which would be the suffix, ka yo. Or I could even put in an honorific marker, like ka seo, right? That would also be a suffix. Everyone okay on root versus suffix? Okay. Now let's introduce a term here. A writing system that is committed to providing a single spelling for each root and each suffix is called a deep orthography. And recognizing that Hangul is a deep orthography helps us understand several facts about the way it works. And I want to try to review some of those facts with you, if you'll permit. First of all, I want to talk to you a little bit about syllable blocks or syllable breaks. Because one of the features of Hangul that you quickly encounter if you're a student is that the blocks of letters in the writing system actually don't correspond to the syllable breaks in pronunciation. Let me give you an example. Take the word for music. Now, the word for music is pronounced mak, right? Mak. But it's not written mak, it's written plus ak, not mak. Now, if you're in grade 2, you might spell it this way, but you're supposed to spell it this way, plus ak. Why is that? Well, the answer, if you understand what a deep orthography does, is quite simple. You have to spell it plus ak because is a root. That the of mak also shows up in these words. So means sound, and it shows up in the word for noise. Also, the word for vowel is mo and the word for voice is song. And that's the reason why we write mak as plus ak, because each root has to have a consistent spelling. And if we're using the spelling in mo and the spelling in so we have to use the spelling in mak. You see how that works? And you might be interested to know that the other half, the second half of mak, is also a root. The ak of mak is a root that means music. So this word here, akki, that means musical instrument. So by spelling mak the way we do, ak, we're actually able to give a consistent spelling not only to the root that means music, the root that means sound, but also to the root that means music, namely ak. Let me show you one more example of this. Take the word for mermaid, which is pronounced ina. Now, it's pronounced ina, but it's spelled in-a, not ina. This would be the phonetic spelling, the shallow orthography, but the deep orthography forces you to write in plus a. Why is that? Well, that's because in is a root. And in other words, the in has to be written this way. Like the word for beautiful person is mi in. The word for old person is no in. Notice how that in shows up in mi in and no in. And that's why we write in na the way we do, in plus o. Each root has to have a single consistent spelling in a deep orthography. Now, you might be interested to know that the second half of ina is also a root. The a part is a root. It means fish. And we see it showing up in the word for shark, sang-o, right? So by writing the word for mermaid, which now you understand what it is, right? It's a person fish, right? By writing it the way we do, in a, we let each root have a single consistent spelling. And that's what deep orthographies do. Each root gets a single consistent spelling. Let me give you a quick third example, then we'll move on. The word for ice, aurum, aurum. A lot of people, even semi-educated Koreans, will sometimes write it like this, aurum, rather than like this, ol and But the reason that you should write it ol plus is that ol is a verb root, and guess what it means? It means freeze, right? It means freeze. So there's a verb olda, which means to freeze, and you can say ol go iso, means it's freezing. And because ol is a root, we want it to have a consistent spelling. We want it to have the same spelling in aurum, ice, as it has in olda, to freeze. And that's why we write aurum as ol plus Let me look now at a second feature of Hangul that we can also understand by thinking about it as a deep orthography. And that is that some of the letters in Hangul are silent, yet they have to be written. So here's a nice example. The word for price, which is pronounced cap, cap. But notice that for some reason we're forced to put an S sound, a shiot, at the end, even though we don't hear it pronounced. Why is that? Well, it's because there are other forms of that word in which we do hear and see the S sound. For example, here, kapshi, kapshi sayo, the price is expensive. Notice that all of a sudden, the investment that we made in the shiot, in that previous word where it was silent, pays off, because here the shiot actually gets pronounced. This is kapshi. And we want that root, the root that means price, to have a single consistent spelling. We have to. That's the king's idea, the deep orthography. Here's another silent letter that will drive you crazy in the early stages of learning Korean. Take the verb form you have there, joayo, joayo. Notice how you're required, I'm sure lots of red ink has been spilled over this, to put a hiut at the end of the verb root. Choayo. No one pronounces it chohayo. It's choayo. There's absolutely no H is pronounced there. But you have to write a hiut there. And the reason is that, of course, in other forms of that word, like this form here, the hiut makes its presence felt. So this word here, which is the infinitival form, the dictionary form, to be good, there, this is pronounced chota, not choda, but chota. The T gets aspirated because of the hiut, which you have to put at the end of the root. Every single thing that you have to include in the spelling ends up being required if you look at more than one use of the root or more than one use of the suffix. Let me give you two more examples of Hangul's deep orthography at work. First of all, consider the pronunciation for Hangul Day, next Sunday, October 9th, 570 years, right? You know how that's pronounced? Hangulal. Now, notice that you're spelling it with a nion, like nal, nal, but you're pronouncing it Hangulal. Now, if it was a shallow orthography, you would be writing it with an L, Hangulal. But it's a deep orthography, and your concern is not to represent exactly how it's pronounced. Your concern is getting a consistent spelling for each root and each suffix. And if we look at some other words that have the root meaning day in them, we find that the N spelling is actually the right one. So this word here, nalmada, this is the same root that means day, and here we get an N sound, nal, right, nalmada. Same thing in Orininal, Children's Day. Same thing in Aboinal, Parents' Day. So the reason that we write lal as nal in Hangul lal is that the root is nal, and we see that by looking at other words. Here's another word you guys may be familiar with, hangyan. This means school year. Now notice that we have to write it hak with the keough, which is the K sound, the kr sound. But we pronounce it hangyan, hangyan. Why don't we write it like it's pronounced, hangyan? Well, because it's not a shallow orthography, it's a deep orthography. And you want a single spelling for each root, and that root hak, which means study, shows up in a bunch of other words where we can see that the keough, the K, is the right spelling. So the word for student is hak-seng. There you hear the k, right? Hak-seng. Or take the word for university, teak, teak. There again you hear the keough. In order to give hak a single consistent spelling, we need to use that spelling, hak, with a K. Good? It's unaspirated, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Did I accidentally aspirate it? I think when I said teak, yeah, yeah. Okay. But it's spelled correctly, right? Yeah. Okay. Let me summarize up till now. So Hangul is a deep orthography. It's guided by a commitment to providing a consistent spelling for each root and each suffix. And one of the ways to appreciate just how good Hangul is to look at a language that tried and failed. How about English? English sort of tries to have a deep orthography. Many of its strange spellings are actually designed to provide a consistent spelling for each root and each suffix. Look at these silent letters. Bomb, him, damn, sign. The silent letters that kids have so much trouble learning to use when they're in elementary school. But you know, the B, the silent B in bomb shows up in bombardment. The silent N in hymn shows up in hymnal, and so on down. You see what English is doing here? It's providing a consistent spelling for each root. Roots that occur by themselves, roots that occur inside larger words, they're given the same spelling. That's deep orthography at work in English. Here's some other examples. Look at president and presidential. In the word president, the letter T represents a T sound. In the word presidential, it represents a sh sound. Right? But what are we doing here? We're providing a single spelling for the root, right? President. Same thing all the way down. I mean, take electric and electricity. Here the C represents a k sound. Here it represents a s sound. But we use the same spelling in both words because we're trying to be consistent about how we spell the roots, consistent with the idea of a deep orthography. And you can see the other words there, same way. We also find deep orthography in effect for vowel pairs. So you take words like divine and divinity. Notice that the letter I represents an I sound in divine and an I sound in divinity. The letter A represents an A sound in sane and an A sound in sanity. But right, if it was a shallow orthography, that would be terrible. But if it's a deep orthography and you're trying to provide a consistent spelling for each root, it's not so bad. Because that's the effect that we get there. Each root has a consistent spelling. The problem with English is that unlike Korean Hangul, English ends up not being very consistent or very good at being a deep orthography. So you can see these examples here where you're not following the principles of a deep orthography. President and presidency have the same root, but they're spelled differently in the two words. Decide and decision have the same root, but they're spelled differently. English departs from the principle of deep orthography in favor of shallow orthography in places that cannot be entirely predicted. It's not a great deep orthography, especially when you compare it with King Sejong's Hangul. You see, what makes Hangul unique and great is its strict adherence to the principle of a consistent spelling for each root and each suffix. And you know what King Sejong presented to the Korean people on October 9th in 1446 has become the world's most perfect deep orthography. That's what the fuss is all about. That's why Hangul is celebrated in Korea and around the world. Now, how many of you are students of Korean? Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what it takes to master Hangul. In the Hunmin Jeongeum, one of the members of the King's Academy provided a postscript in which he said, these 28 letters, now there's only 24, but these 28 letters are so simple and precise that the wise can master them in one morning, and even the fool can learn them in 10 days. There's your claim. Well, there are a lot. I sat next to a Korean linguist at a conference once who broke down in tears as he described to me his experience in grade 1, grade 2, in elementary school in Korea. And the claim is there's no dyslexia in Korea, but he had dyslexia. He couldn't. And of course, he was reminded that fools could learn it in 10 days. And here he was in second grade and he still couldn't read. Right? But of course, this was PR. And I have no doubt that Jang In-ji had his heart in the right place, and he was trying to promote a new and important advance in literacy in Korea. And you know, it is easy, relatively easy, to learn the alphabet and the basic sound for each letter. That actually is relatively easy. But two other things are required to really master Hangul as an orthography. And for those of you who are students, I want to talk to you for a minute about what those two other things are. First, you need a broad grasp of Korean vocabulary. Remember the example from earlier on, the umak? Remember, that means music, right? And it has to be written plus ak, not umak. And remember that because is a root that means sound, and ak is a root that means music. And to understand why umak has to be written plus ak, you need to know that is a root that means sound, and that ak is a root that means music. Or same thing with ina. Remember that it has to be written this way, not this way. And the reason it has to be written this way is that in is a root that means person, and o is a root that means fish. And unless you know that those are two separate roots with their own meanings, then you don't understand why that word is spelled that way, as in plus o. Now here's the wonderful thing that a lot of learners of Korean don't understand. They find themselves cursing Hangul and its conventions for spelling. They don't understand that Hangul actually helps you learn vocabulary because it makes the roots transparent. And I'm going to give you an example here involving 6 words, the ones you see on the board. And I want you to notice that each of these 6 words contains the root hak, which means study. And you can see in hak sang, it's student, so the meaning of study is there. Hagwon, which is educational institute, but typically they end up being cram schools. There too, you see hak, right, which means study. Hangyeon, which is the school year, again, same thing. Hakki, which is your semester, same thing. Ipak, which is starting school or entrance to school. Hak is there once again, and finally over here in school vacation, we have the same root hak. It shows up in all 6 words. Right? Now, that's only because it's a deep orthography. If Korean had a shallow orthography, and if Korean was spelling words the way they are pronounced, the spellings would not look like that. This word here, hak sang, would still be spelled the same way. But this word here, hagwon, would have to be spelled like this, ha-gwon. And you wouldn't see that root hak in there, right? You wouldn't see it. It'd be ha-gwon. Or take this word here, hangyeon. If we had a shallow system of spelling in Korean, this would be written hang. You wouldn't see the hak. You wouldn't realize that the meaning of study was inside that word. And the same all the way across. Here, this word, if we went by the pronunciation, would have to be written like this, haki. And this word here would be written like this. How would you ever see the meaning of study in this word if it was written phonetically? It's only because we're providing a single consistent spelling for each root that we write it this way, and that we can see that there must be, in the meaning of the word, an element of study, and so forth. For this word, for those words, for thousands of other words. And if you want to find out more about that, for thousands and thousands of other examples of how Hangul, by providing a consistent spelling for each root, actually helps you learn the very vocabulary that you need in order to be able to spell Korean effectively, you might want to check out this book, the Handbook of Korean Vocabulary, which is really a root dictionary for Korean and lists hundreds and hundreds of roots with thousands and thousands of corresponding forms, with the Hangul spelling system showing you exactly what the relationships are among the different parts of the word. The book was co-authored by Chu Miho, who's sitting here in the front row. Now, the second thing you need to really understand Hangul is a good grasp of Korean phonology. Now, phonology, in case you're not sure, is the linguistic system that determines how words are actually pronounced. And Hangul does a wonderful job of helping you there as well. Let me give you a couple of examples. Remember that word, the nal in Hangul lal. And we saw that nal is pronounced lal in Hangul lal, but that's not an exception. That's a general rule of Korean phonology. Whenever you have an N after an L, the N becomes pronounced as an L. So here's another example here. This is 1 year, 1 year. And it's pronounced ilyan, ilyan. Here too, the N ends up being pronounced as an L. That's a very general rule. Here's another example. This is the word for knife, kal, and this is the word for blade, nal. And the way you say knife blade in Korean, you say kalal, kalal. The N is pronounced as if it was an L after the other L. So that pronunciation that's so puzzling in Hangul lal actually reflects a very general rule of Korean phonology. And once you learn that rule, all of a sudden, the spellings become very obvious. Another example is the root hak, which means study. We saw that in a word like school year, hangyan, we saw that the hak is pronounced hang. But that's not an exception either. That's also a very general rule of Korean phonology, that the K is pronounced eng in front of a nasal sound. So this is the word for book, right? Tek, and this man means only. If you put them together, it's pronounced cheng, chengman. The Keough, the K, is pronounced eng in front of the N, cheng, chengman. Or other example here, very simple, is it mongni? Are you eating? Notice that the Keough, the K, is pronounced eng in front of the nasal, mongni. So what's happening up there in hangyan is just an example of a very general rule of phonology in Korean at work. Now the amazing thing is, for those of you who are students, and you want to get this faster than you otherwise would, Hangul actually helps you learn how Korean phonology works. Here's what you have to do. You just have to notice the difference between the way the word is spelled and the way the word is pronounced, and you'll quickly notice that there's about 12 basic phonological rules of Korean. And once you've mastered those 12 rules, you're well on your way to having a much more authentic pronunciation than you already do. And I'm going to illustrate that with those same 6 words that I had before. Notice that in all 6 words, The morpheme that means study is spelled exactly the same way, because that's what the king wanted. Every root has a consistent spelling. But if you listen to the difference between the way it's spelled and the way it's pronounced, you'll find the same simple phonological rules applying over and over and over again, just begging for you to learn them so that the whole system comes under control. So here, this is the spelling, hak-one, but the pronunciation is hagwan. What's happening here is that the K at the end of the first syllable is being pushed into the second syllable if there's not already a consonant there. Moreover, the K is pronounced like a G sound, so we say hagwan, hagwan, right? There are two very, very basic rules of Korean phonology here. One is consonant at the end of one syllable moves into the next syllable if there isn't a consonant there. And the second big rule is that a sound like a K becomes voiced like a G in that context. Or take this example here, hangmyeon. What's going on here, we've already seen, is that the K is becoming eng in front of a nasal. That's another very basic rule of Korean phonology. Or here, hakki, what's happening here is when you have two identical sounds, they convert into a single tensed sound. Or here, when you have an H after a so-called stop sound or a consonant like a P, the P gets aspirated. So instead of saying ip, hak, you say ipak. Here, the H gets deleted between a nasal and a vowel. So instead of saying, in careful, as you might do in very careful speech, instead of saying pang hak, you say pangak. Now, as I said, there's about a dozen rules like that. Each and every one of those rules can be seen if you simply compare the way King Sejong decided to spell the language and the way people actually pronounce it. If you want, there's a book that might help you, The Sounds of Korean, but that's up to you. By the way, I want to tell you, Handbook of Korean Vocabulary, I wrote that for myself. Sounds of Korean, I wrote that for myself. I did not write it for you guys. I wrote it for myself. So I could figure out what the heck was going on. In both cases, Miho joined me as co-author, and it could not have been done without her. But these are the basic rules that ultimately speakers of Korean use, and the sooner and better you guys learn them, the sooner you will be speaking more like a native speaker. And here's your final test. How will you know when you have mastered Hangul? You know how you're going to know? Someone will say to you, how do you spell upda? Upda. And you know what you'll say? You'll say, I don't know. That'll be the sign that you've mastered Hangul. Here's the reason. It could be that you spell it this way. This is one possible spelling of upda. That's the spelling that would be appropriate if it means not be. And that's because in that word you have forms like upsoyo, right? Where you can actually hear the piup and the shiot, right? Upsoyo. That's one way to spell it. But it could also be this, upda. And that would be the appropriate spelling if you have a form of the word apayo, right? You know what that means? Spill, right? Overturn. But it could also be spelled, you could also spell it like this. That's also upda, right? And that would be the right spelling if the word was abayo, where you just hear the pia. And that means to carry someone on your back. Upda has 3 different spellings. And the way you know that is that, first of all, you've mastered the vocabulary. You know that there are those 3 verbs, one that means not be, another that means turn over or spill, and another means carry on your back. Plus, you know that all 3 end up being pronounced the same way in front of that ta ending. That's how you'll know. Now, that might discourage you, but it shouldn't. In fact, you guys, even if you're in first year of Korean, you're actually well on your way to understanding how Hangul works. If you're at the point in your study of Korean where you're able to write mogosoyo when someone says, how do you spell I ate, mogosoyo. If you're at the point where you spell it this way, instead of spelling it this way, right, you're on your way, because you know what you've understood? You've realized that there's a root that means eat, mok, and you realize it has to have the same spelling each time it's written, right? When you write it in the word mokda, the dictionary form, it's mok, right? And therefore it also has to be mok in mogosoyo, and you're not tempted to write it this way, because you know it's mokda, and mok has to have the same spelling, right? Each and every time it's used. Moreover, you know there's a past tense suffix, up, and it has to have the same spelling each and every time it's used, because that's what a deep orthography does. And that's why you'll spell it this way, with the and the sang-syok together. You won't spell it this way with the keough from the root over here and the from the suffix here. I bet each and every one of you who made it through Korean 101 or whatever the right course number here is at University of Notre Dame have got that part figured out. And that's the key insight. Subconsciously, you've already learned that each root and each suffix is supposed to be given a single spelling, regardless of how it's actually pronounced. And I hope that as you continue to learn these things, you'll appreciate even more the wonders of Hangul, which is King Sejong's legacy to the Korean people, and I believe to all of humanity. So please enjoy Hangul Lal next Sunday. Thank you very much. Kamsahamnida. Thank you.
Do you take some questions or reactions?
Yeah, we'd love to have some questions. Yes.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Mm-hmm.
It was theoretically fascinating
Mm-hmm.
and deeply useful.
Oh, thank you.
Very rare to have such a wonderful combination. I have two very mundane
Mm-hmm.
questions. Presumably a language could move from deep to shallow.
Yes, good.
And there are threats.
Right.
You mentioned one example where educated Koreans might not even know how to spell
Right.
a certain word. I assume
Mhm.
also with foreign words, loan words, there might be a threat. The first
Right.
question is,
Yeah.
who and what are the guardians
Right,
of this
right.
deep orthography?
Sure,
And
yeah,
then,
right.
Another historical question
Right.
that's related.
Right,
You mentioned that 3 consonants and a vowel disappeared.
right,
Did they disappear in 33 because of a
yeah,
better analysis of the rules?
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't imagine it they disappeared because of usage. Because
Right.
It would be more like a
Right, sure,
shallow
sure,
response.
right, sure. Well, the Ministry of Education, I think, is the ultimate arbiter, isn't it, Miho, of the spelling? Yeah. So the Ministry of Education, yeah. So Ministry of Education decides. And in fact, some words have had their spelling changed, or the Ministry of Education has permitted the spelling to evolve into a more pronunciation-like spelling because people are no longer aware of the existence of 2 separate morphemes. So the example I like to give, I don't think this is your favorite example, Miho, but there's a word mudam, which means burial, right? Mudam. Well, mudam actually, it comes from the root mutta. Mut means bury. So it should really be mut plus but people write it mudam. And that's because they no longer see the root inside it. And that's a standard spelling now. Miho, you have another example? Mechil, yeah, mechil. Mechil, which is like how many people? Yeah, right. So how many days? Mechil is written mya plus chil. It should be myat plus il, because the il means day and the myat means how many. But it's become sort of a frozen expression. People don't think of it as being 2 parts. And the ministry allows that spelling, myat-chil, even though it should be myat plus il. Right? Now, the second half of your question was...
We lost the 3.
Oh yeah, the 3. Right. So the consonants that were lost because there's no corresponding sound for them anymore. So one of the consonants that was lost was a triangle, a little triangle. And that represented the sound Z. But modern Korean no longer has the sound Z, so that's gone. And among the vowels, the vowel symbol that was lost is just a little dot. And that dot represented a vowel sound which we think was something like O, and that's not there anymore either in Korean. But for anyone who's staying around for my second sort of half talk on Sejong actually has that vowel, and it has the symbol in its orthography as well. Now, looking ahead, there are problems on the horizon for Hangul because a number of sound contrasts either have been lost or are being lost, but the orthography is still trying to maintain the contrasts. So, I can't write here, but there's, for those of you, there's this vowel here, and there's this vowel here, and most Koreans don't distinguish it anymore, yet the orthography requires you to separate them. So, like the word for dog and the word for crab, right? So dog is written like this, Keough, and then and then crab is written like this, Keough, and then but they're pronounced the same way for most people. So at some point, a decision is going to have to be made, right, about whether you're going to try to keep those orthographic contrasts, even though they're no longer realized phonetically. But they do help you distinguish between words, like the word crab and the word dog. When they're written, you can see the difference. Things get even worse when you start looking at the diphthongs, like the we. So there are actually 3 different ways to spell we in Korean, depending on what historically the spelling was. And that 3-way orthographic contrast is maintained mostly by teachers, by insisting that students maintain those distinctions, but they're not maintained phonetically anymore. So yeah, there are, as time goes by, every orthography needs to either be tidied up a little bit or it starts to lose its motivation. Yeah. That's a really great question, really great points. Yeah, Lionel?
I've got a couple of different questions. The first has to do with language ideology. It
Yeah.
sounded like earlier in your talk you were saying that you quoted various Koreans who were talking about simple Korean was a good ways to learn. And I'm wondering, since in fact you've made some points here that make it very clear would be effective by way of consistency you talked about to learn. On the other hand, it's obvious that this perception of the easiness of it is something which probably doesn't make sense on the ground. So I'm wondering how this kind of language ideology persists.
Right, exactly.
This is a problem in Japanese too. There are real ideological matters belonging to not just language but also culture. And I was just thinking about how that happens.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point, Lionel. In fact, the man who was sobbing on my shoulder at the conference was asking me the same question, the Korean man. Why do they keep saying it's so easy when it's not? And part of the problem is this, I believe, is that people are failing to distinguish between what's called an alphabet and what's called an orthography. An alphabet is a set of letters. The Roman alphabet's a very good example. An orthography is how you use those letters to spell words. Now, English and Spanish have essentially the same alphabet, the Roman alphabet, but the way in which they use their letters to spell words is dramatically different. Spanish has a very shallow orthography, and English has a bad, deep orthography, right? And I think that when Koreans talk about Hangul being easy, they mean there's only 24 letters, and you can learn the basic sound of each letter quite quickly. They don't realize that that's not the same thing as an orthography. And to be able to use the orthography well, you need to have mastered very large portions of Korean vocabulary, as we saw with our umak example, and you also need to understand Korean phonology. And the first step to almost any problem is to educate people as to, what's really going on. And I think if more Koreans understood that their writing system was a deep orthography, and that it was based on the principle of a single spelling, consistent spelling for each root and each suffix, then they would have a better understanding of just how subtle it is and how dramatically far it departs from the idea of a single sound and a single letter. And yet you have the Korean government itself issuing publications suggesting that you read each letter, each word as it is spelled, which you absolutely do not do, right? And the people on the front lines, the people who are teaching, whether they're teaching elementary or middle school kids in Korea, or whether they're teaching second language learners here at University of Notre Dame, they know that people are very capable of misspelling Korean, even if they know the alphabet, right? Yes.
How
So,
much of that has to do with contrasting Hangul with the neighboring languages?
right,
So Chinese and
right, yeah,
and English.
yeah, that's possible,
which
yeah,
are
right,
so much more complicated
right,
than everybody
that's right,
knows.
that's right,
So
that's right, yeah,
traffic
oh yeah,
patterns and
yeah, that's right. Well, it's a point of great pride in Korea that the Korean system is simpler and more elegant than the Chinese system, and maybe even than the Japanese system, because even the hiragana needs far more symbols than Hangul. And of course, hiragana only gets you mostly just suffixes in Japanese anyhow, because you use kanji for the roots. In fact, it's been taken to the point, I don't know if you know this, but there's actually a society in Korea that's been trying to export Hangul to other countries, to other languages. So there's a language in the Philippines that was given a Hangul-based writing system a few years ago, and a language in Indonesia that was given a Hangul-based writing system a few years ago as well. And again, that's partly based on misunderstanding, because what they actually did was they used the Korean letters to write these other languages, but they didn't use the Korean orthography to write those other languages. In fact, the spelling rules that they had to have for those other languages were very different from the spelling rules that they have for Korean. They ended up with shallow orthographies for these other languages using Korean letters. And if they had read the Hunmin Jeongeum, they would have seen King Sejong saying, the reason we need our own writing system is that our language is different from Chinese. Well, the language in the Philippines is different from Korean, and the language in Indonesia is also different from Korea. But the people advocating for the use of Hangul were, I think, confused in the sense that they think we have a wonderful, simple system. Well, there's a wonderful, simple alphabet, but that's not the same thing as... What makes Korean special is not really the alphabet, it's the orthography, the deep orthography.